All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our final session. I can't believe we've already reached week 4 of Be Well San Diego, sponsored by Kaiser Permanente. It's been a wonderful journey these past few weeks, and today we're wrapping it up with Sleep Well, which is going to be focused on proper rest and sleep, which is truly the foundation of everything we've been discussing throughout this wellness series. I'm Darby McWaters from the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce, and it's been my pleasure hosting you throughout this entire wellness series. As always, cameras and mics will be off during today's session, but please continue using that Q&A box at the bottom of your screen for any questions. We're going to have our final Q&A session at the end. So here we are at our finale, Sleep Well. Sleep is one of those things we all know is very important, but it's often the first thing that we sacrifice when life gets busy. Today, we're going to be exploring why quality rest is so essential to everything else we've covered, from nutrition and stress management to financial wellness. This is going to mark the end of our 4-week journey together, meeting every Wednesday from noon to 1 p.m. And for those who have attended all 4 sessions, congratulations. You're now entered to win one of 3 $100 Dick's Sporting Goods gift cards. For our final presentation, I'm happy to introduce Dr. Heidi Meyer, a primary care physician at Kaiser Permanente. Dr. Meyer brings her medical expertise and deep understanding of how sleep impacts every aspect of our health and well-being. As a practicing physician, she sees firsthand how proper rest can transform not just how we feel, but also how our bodies function and heal as well. So Dr. Meyer, thanks so much for being here with us to close out our series. We're very excited to learn from your expertise.
Thank you, Darby, and thank you to everyone listening and taking out precious time in your lunch hour to attend our session today. I wholeheartedly agree with Darby. Sleep is absolutely foundational. So I had nothing to do with the order of the talks, but I'm really happy that sleep is the finale, because I do believe it is key. So we're going to be talking a lot about sleep today. Real quick question you guys can ask yourself. I've got a flower here on the screen here, and I'm wondering if any of you happen to know what flower that is. It actually grows in San Diego, and it is associated with sleep. So a little you guys can kind of throw in the Q&A if you know what it is, and we can give away the answer at the end. So I'm an integrative family medicine doctor at Kaiser San Diego, and I do talks on the foundations of health. Integrative medicine isn't alternative medicine. It just looks at things that are not traditionally focused on in med school and brings those in terms of how we look at health and total wellness. So our case. So I want to kind of put this in the setting of a patient. So when we do talks to other doctors, we always try and set it in the real world. And when I'm giving talks to patients, I want to tell them, hey, I had a patient like you. Here's what their situation was. It's a little bit like yours. Maybe some of the tips that worked for them could work for you. So I don't know if you guys are television fans, but you might be familiar with Barry. And we're saying today that Barry's a 30-something former Marine. He's an aspiring actor, and he often pulls all-nighters at a second job, which he thinks might be interfering with his ability to memorize lines and get ready for his auditions. Maybe it's ADHD. He's not sure because he can't concentrate, and he just can't sleep even when he has the chance.
We can't see your presentation right now, just so you know.
Oh, you can't see it?
No.
I'm not quite sure how that happened. All right, so hold on. Let me get out of presentation mode here and go back in. Thanks for interrupting, Darby.
Of course.
Okay. And let me go back into sharing mode. We'll try this again. Let me know, Darby.
Looks good. I think we just need to go into slideshow mode and then we're all set.
Okay. Now I'm worried that if I go into slideshow, it's going to bop us off again. So please let me know, because that's kind of what happened. Did anything change?
Looks
Yes.
looks good.
Slides moving. Yes.
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay. All right. So, what are we going to go over today? We're going to talk about the physiology of sleep so that we can kind of make sure that we take care of ourselves. We're going to talk about the dangers of sleep deprivation and how it really does impact how your brain functions on a day to day basis, and also how it can impact memory, mood, and concentration. And then we're going to talk about this concept of sleep hygiene, which is essentially the sum of all the practices we use throughout our day, aiming for a good night's sleep. So let's talk about sleep physiology just a little bit. So I'm sure we have all heard about the circadian rhythm. The circadian rhythm is something that is not unique to mammals, but mammals have a unique circadian rhythm. As you know, we are not nocturnal creatures. We do not stay up at night. We're supposed to be asleep. Unfortunately, in the modern world, more and more of us are becoming nocturnal, and we're confusing that with insomnia, when in fact we're purposely doing things that shift our rhythm more and more into the dark hours. So, one thing for you to know as a non medical person is that we actually have a lot of genes on our DNA dedicated to this rhythm, kind of more than we would expect as scientists, dedicated to maintaining this sleep wake cycle. It's pretty darn important. And the more we research sleep, the more we realize, yes, it is an issue. A message that Zoom quit. Are you still hearing me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Good. I'm glad it was a false message. Okay, so back to the circadian rhythm. So we have genes that regulate this clock, and they are expressed in both our brain and even in places like our skin and our abdominal organs, including our heart, kidneys, and adrenal glands. And these genes actually sense darkness and light. Yes, they actually sense darkness and light. So, most of us know we have cells in the back of our eye. These are retinal cells. And I'm sure that no one's surprised to know that these cells can tell whether you're in the darkness or in the light. And that sends information to our brain, specifically to our pineal gland. And our pineal gland is one of the main signalers to the brain and to the adrenal glands to let the body know when it should be releasing cortisol when we're awake or melatonin when we're trying to be asleep at night. The other thing that can impact these genes and therefore the hormones that get produced in our body are things like stress. I'm sure you're not surprised to hear that. Meal timing, so when you're eating, and even what kind of food you consume. We know that from research, when a person eats foods that tend to be more plentiful in the winter, that the circadian clock expects bedtime to be earlier since the days are shorter in wintertime on Mother Earth. So, really amazing things if you think about it. And when I tell patients this, I explain to them, you realize that everything you do throughout the day, even the type of food that you eat, is having an impact on how and when you are able to sleep. And when I give them that information, they start to think, well, maybe that third espresso that I'm having at 2 p.m. really isn't the best idea. And maybe that is contributing to the fact that I can't get to sleep until 2 a.m. So this is a really basic kind of chart on the two main sleep hormones, cortisol and melatonin. And as you can see, they are inversely related, which means that when one is high, the other is low. And they kind of oppose one another like yin and yang. And that's when everything's working well. And when our body and our sleep times in with darkness and light, because you can really consider melatonin the darkness hormone and cortisol the daytime hormone. So let's talk a little bit more about these hormones, how we make them, and what they do in our body. So first, let's talk about melatonin, the sleep hormone. This is a hormone that is made in our central nervous system in our pineal gland, which is tucked away behind our eyes, not surprisingly, and it's directly connected to our retina. And when it senses darkness, it makes melatonin. It cannot make melatonin if there is light hitting the back of your eye. So if there's any of you out there that sleep with the TV on or have a big window with a lot of nighttime light. In San Diego County, we are one of the brightest cities, brightest counties in the entire country at night. So there's a lot of ambient reflected light that comes into our bedrooms if we don't have room darkening or blackout shades, or other sorts of electronics that might kind of make their way into your sleep environment. You're actually suppressing production of melatonin, which is too bad because it's an antioxidant, which means it promotes health and longevity. And it goes in and out of the brain and into all the tissues in our body when we make it. And it doesn't last for very long, which means that when the sun rises in the morning, our body slowly stops making it and allows us to wake up. It also helps with what we call the hippocampal, pituitary, and adrenal axis. And that is that brain, gut, and fight or flight connection that helps our body rest at night and recover, and then also wake up during the day. The other thing to know is that melatonin helps you remember things. So if you guys were ever in school cramming for a test and you were up all night and you really didn't make a lot of melatonin, you are not going to consolidate and make those memories as well. So actually the best thing to do before the morning of a test is actually to try and get good night's sleep, a good 8 hours. We're also looking at melatonin because it has amazing anti-cancer agent properties, and it's being studied as an anti-cancer agent in both lung cancer and skin cancer. We also know that it impacts ovulation and libido. So chronic insomnia or poor sleep habits is actually something that we look at for fertility. We also ask patients who are trying to get pregnant or may become pregnant to avoid taking excessive melatonin and just rely on the melatonin that their body makes at night because of darkness. Now we've got cortisol. So cortisol is the wake and react hormone. It's our daytime hormone, and it is made in the adrenal gland based on signaling from our central nervous system, from our pituitary. We get a peak of cortisol a mere 45 minutes after we wake up in the morning. So I know that seems hard to believe that we have the most stress hormone produced right after we wake up in the morning, but it is true. That's why in medicine, if we're checking your cortisol levels, we want you to try and get that lab done, usually within 60 to 90 minutes of waking up. It has a similar half-life of melatonin, maybe a little bit shorter. So it lasts minutes, not hours. That's why if you ever had someone cut you off on the freeway, you get that little adrenaline rush and that goes right away, but you might feel a little revved up for a few more hours because you might get a little cortisol bump there. We know that it's a steroid hormone, and we'll talk about why that's important later. Basically, our body is very good at making steroid hormones, and other hormones that aren't steroid hormones, like melatonin, require a lot of specific nutritional factors. We also know that there are receptors on every single organ in the body for cortisol. So when you release cortisol, your entire physiology changes. And that's good. We need cortisol to stay alive. We need cortisol to be able to be sharp, to be thinking clearly. But we also need it to go down to lower levels at night. We also know that those circadian rhythm or clock genes that get turned or turned off are cortisol sensitive. So if we're always releasing cortisol, it kind of replicates us being in front of light too much. So melatonin is a kind of a younger person's hormone. So not surprisingly, when we need a good amount of sleep to grow, repair, and learn, our bodies are very good when we are sleeping at making a lot of melatonin. So you can see on this chart that very high peak, that is the high amount of cortisol that we make in the evening when we're between 5 and 10 years old. And you can see that the peak is right around 3 in the morning. And then by the time that we're over 70, it kind of barely peaks at night. But throughout the ages, we are always releasing melatonin when it is dark out, with the peak level rising to its very, very highest level about halfway through your typical 8-hour night. Now, we've really known the importance of sleep for a long time. The Greeks actually had a god for sleep. Not shockingly, that god's name was Hypnos. And if you look at the kind of life story that the Greeks gave to this god, it was all about the things that even back then they realized were important for sleep. So Hypnos lived in a cave. Caves are dark. It was in the underworld. There was no sun, there was no moon, there was no source of light. And then they associated this darkness with death, which makes sense because we do lose consciousness when we are asleep. His mother was Nyx, which is goddess of night, and his father was the god of darkness. And then they also knew about the fact that certain plants could aid in sleep. So outside his cave, he had poppies growing. And anyone who's ever seen The Wizard of Oz knows the importance of poppies in inducing sleep. If you've ever heard of the drug called morphine, it is derived from the poppy plant because of its ability to cause a person to become drowsy and sleep. And then through the cave, through the river of Lethe, which is the river of forgetfulness. So you all know that when you go to bed and you wake up 8 hours later, if you had a good night's sleep, the only thing you may remember are dreams. But other than that, there might have been dogs barking, someone might have gotten up in the house, you would have slept right through it, you had no memory. So I was talking a few minutes ago about how we make these sleep and daytime hormones. In terms of melatonin, which is our sleep hormone, it is not a steroid hormone, and it is made using nutritional factors and amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks of protein, so we're getting those through our food, and we also store them in our body. One of the things that I want you to pay attention to on this particular graphic are the two green boxes. You can see several abbreviations for some important vitamins and minerals, such as iron, magnesium, calcium, vitamin B6, folic acid, vitamin C, and zinc. These are all cofactors that are needed to create a very important neurotransmitter called serotonin. Serotonin is the happiness hormone. And then that is ultimately converted in the brain only when it's dark to melatonin. In fact, manufacturers who produce melatonin as a supplement create the product in a dark room. They literally create it within a dark room, similar to what a photographer would use to develop actual film. So I don't find it coincidental that melatonin and serotonin kind of balance each other out in the body, and that you need serotonin as a precursor to melatonin. A lot of people will say when they don't sleep well that they get grumpy. So sometimes I'll talk to them about adding a multivitamin and a B complex just to make sure that they're topping off their nutritional intake and getting all of those co-nutrients needed in order to make adequate serotonin and therefore melatonin. But the main thing is that it requires darkness. So we cannot convert serotonin to melatonin without darkness, the absence of light. Okay. So it's unusual for us to think that making a product requires the absence of something. But I always try and say it's the presence of darkness that is really, really needed. But you can think of those photons, those light photons that hit your eye as kind of a stop sign, and it keeps the serotonin, melatonin production from happening. The other thing to know is that melatonin is made deep within our cells in little organelles called mitochondria. And mitochondria are higher in number when we're younger, lower in number when we get older, but we also make more of them if we continually stay active in our lives and do things like exercise. Resistance or weight training is specifically good at maintaining high levels of mitochondria in the cells, as is any sort of long distance or kind of endurance exercise. So that's why when people say we want you to be exercising more to sleep, It's not just because exercise regulates the central nervous system and helps slow down the brain at night. It's not because it tires you out, although it does. It makes you a little bit more ready for that physiologic drive for sleep to kick in at night. But it also keeps the number of mitochondria high. And the more mitochondria in that pineal gland that you've got, the better. Okay. So just keep all these things in mind, all the little things that we can do to make our sleep kind of quality better and better and better with all of these little additive things we can do throughout our lives. Now, one of the things I always like to tell patients is patients will come in and they'll say, "Oh, I eat really well." And that's all they say. I have a great diet. And that's as much as I get out of them. And I don't necessarily want to hear everything they've eaten on, for the last 30 days, nor would they remember. But what I tell patients is, I'm sure you eat really well. But if you are an average American, based on data collected by the National Institutes of Health, most of us could probably do a little bit better. So you can see in the red boxes on this chart, we have a couple of those important vitamins and minerals that I mentioned are absolutely needed for us to get to that serotonin neurotransmitter and then, of course, convert it to melatonin. And on this chart, you can see that magnesium is a mineral that almost half of us don't get enough of on a daily basis in our diets. Calcium's not far behind. And then vitamin C, which is another cofactor to make serotonin and melatonin, up to 40% of us aren't getting enough. And then zinc and B6 are also in the mid-teens or so. So you have to realize, are you confident that you're in the upper 50% or could you be in the lower 50%? So a good way of figuring that out is I tell my patients, how often do you cook? And if you are cooking and making from scratch a meal once a day in your home, I say you're probably in the upper 50%. And when I say from scratch, that doesn't mean that you opened up a packet of instant oatmeal, dumped it in a bowl, and put some water in it. Okay, that means that you got some Quaker oats or some steel oats, you boiled them, you chopped up some fruit, you put that on top. Maybe you grabbed a handful of pepitas or chia seeds and you threw that in there. And so that's 3 whole foods that you have in your meal that morning. And that is way, way, way more packed with fiber and vitamins and nutrients than, say, an instant packet of oatmeal. So these little things do make a pretty big difference. Now, cortisol. As I mentioned, cortisol is a steroid hormone. Steroid hormones, by definition, start with cholesterol. And you're probably thinking, oh, I heard cholesterol is bad for you. Well, actually, cholesterol is in the lining of every cell in your body, your skin cells, your brain cells, the cells that make up your vessels, all of your organs. All of those cells are a lipid bilayer layer made of cholesterol. And your body actually makes cholesterol. So if all of you went on a 0 cholesterol diet tomorrow, your body would continue to make it. So the point of this slide is really to let you know that it's really hard for you to not have enough nutritional elements in your body to fail to be able to make cortisol. And if you think about what cortisol does, which is allow us to run from the tiger, that makes sense, right? Because if we are in a middle of a very kind of hard to find food situation and we're in the middle of a famine, we do not want that very important stress hormone to not be made in our body, because then we would get eaten by the tiger as soon as we didn't get enough food. So the bottom line here is that it is easy to make cortisol. We do not need to take a multivitamin. We do not need to eat well. We don't even need to we can be underweight. We can be starving and we will still be able to make cortisol. So that one's not a difficult one to make. So let's talk about now, if we are not actually getting enough sleep, what actually happens to us. So there's a lot of bad things associated with circadian rhythm disruption when we're not sleeping at night. So that this applies to shift workers. Maybe they're getting 8 hours of sleep, but it's during the day and not in a completely dark environment. And then when they're awake, they're in artificial light. And also people who have insomnia. So we see increased associations with cancers. We see bone remodeling, which is bone strengthening. We see higher rates of depression and bipolar disorder, higher rates of pain and chronic pain, which is a huge problem in the United States. A lot of people are dealing with chronic pain, getting 8 quality hours of sleep a night tends to make people say they have lower levels of pain. And it's also associated with obesity. Part of that is because if you're not sleeping at night, you're making more cortisol throughout the day. Cortisol makes us grab calories and store it as fat, and it makes us less likely to go into that fat burning mode. We also know that sleep deprivation is pro-inflammatory, right? So we don't want that. Everyone's like, inflammation. My patients say, how can I decrease my inflammation? And I say, well, we need a little bit, but you don't want too much and you don't want it day in and day out. And getting not enough sleep every night is actually a pro-inflammatory state, whereas getting a good solid 8 hours is anti-inflammatory. And then the role of this rhythm that we talked about is important as well. So the main thing to think about, and if you remember one thing from our talk today, is the phrase taking the trash out. So our cells create a lot of waste products every day, and they have to get rid of that trash. And they do that at night when we're sleeping. So it's really important that we give the body adequate time to take the trash out. Sometimes I'll say the word defrag, right? If your computer ever has to go into a defrag, you have to empty all those old files that are slowing your computer down. Our central nervous system, our brain does that at night. So it's really important you give it adequate opportunity to do that every single day. We also know that our blood sugar and our lipid metabolism gets thrown if we get poor sleep. And poor sleep is associated with metabolic syndrome, such as fatty liver and type 2 diabetes. We also know there's higher rates of cardiovascular disease if people endorse many, many years of sleep deprivation or sleep dysfunction. We also know our intestines does not work as well. So if you're someone who's always struggling with gut issues, your gut does not work well if you're not sleeping well, because your gut repairs at night, and it needs to do that every night. We also know that when we're not sleeping well, we become hypervigilant, and hypervigilance can lead to depression and anxiety when we're always feeling like we have to be aware and on. And again, it's that cortisol that's keeping us awake and aware, which is good in small amounts, but bad if it never gets turned off. And again, we talked about how melatonin peaks in the middle of the night. Not surprisingly, cortisol is at its nadir right around the same time. And you can see that we get that high cortisol level again right after we woke up in the morning. It continues to dip, and you can kind of see it takes a dive between 12 and 3. I'm sure no one is surprised to see that. Anyone feel tired in the afternoon trying to figure out how you're going to make it till 5 or 5:30 whenever your day ends? That's because you're experiencing a big dive in your cortisol level. But all of that is to prepare you to go to bed several hours later. And then the cortisol slowly starts to go up right around 3 a.m., right around the time that melatonin is at a peak. But you can see in the red and green circles on this screen that there's a lot of important repair processes taking place in the body during those 8 hours. The first thing the body does is it gets its physical needs met. So we have a physiologic drive for sleep that is really driven by how much we did and thought that day. So if we were thinking, we had a crazy day running all around, we didn't have time to get our brain to even settle, maybe we worked out, our body's going to have a physiologic need for sleep. And that need is typically met in about 3 to 4 hours. But that is not the only thing that we need happening. After that repair is done, then the body tends to go into its deep sleep mode. And this is where psychological repair occurs. This is when memories form. This is when emotions get consolidated. This is when we have a real alignment of what happened in the day before and then what's going to happen in the next day, kind of the brain figuring out what do I bring to the forefront and then what do I pack away for later knowledge. This later part of the night, sleep time is incredibly important in mood disorders. So when we see people with a very hard time being awake through the entire 8 hours, they might get up too early. They might wake up at 3 a.m. and then be gone for the rest of the night, just up and up, up, not being able to turn the brain off. That can be a sign of depression, but it also can lead to depression if we don't fix it. So it's kind of a chicken and egg situation. So you explain this all to Barry, who now seems really anxious. And you explain that his sleep may improve his ability to memorize his lines if he just gets more of it, because he'll be able to consolidate those memories. And that the fact that he feels like he's got ADHD and scatterbrain might just be a symptom of ongoing sleep deprivation and insomnia. So, how do we get to the point where we're not one of those people? Well, that is through sleep hygiene. So, let's talk about what those practices look like and how we can incorporate them into our daily lives. So, the first thing to think about is insomnia as a symptom and not a condition itself. Some of you might have gone to your doctor and you might have seen a diagnosis on the note that said insomnia, if you ever talked to him or her about the fact that you were just chronically having a hard time sleeping at night. And it's not really a diagnosis, but it's a symptom. Just like if you came and you had a fever, we would write down fever as one of the things that we addressed at that visit. But I want you to switch how you think about insomnia. So instead of saying I have a condition and it's called insomnia, I want you to realize that insomnia is always a symptom. It's not actually a disease. Just like if you came to me and you had a fever of 101, I wouldn't say, oh, you have a fever. Take some Tylenol and it'll reduce it. You would say to me, Dr. Meyer, why do I have the fever? The fever isn't the thing. It's showing me I have something. What is that thing? Do I have COVID? Am I getting the flu? Like, what's going on? So we have to think the same way about insomnia. We can't just say, oh, you have insomnia. And here, take a sleeping pill. That's the same thing as taking a Tylenol for a fever. It's not fixing the root cause. It's just simply trying to tamp down the symptom of a larger condition. So we really, really have to think about insomnia as a symptom. And doing anything less is really, really bad medicine. And it's also a bad way to think about your health. So if you are a person who's ever gone to a doctor and said, I just need a sleeping pill, give me a sleeping pill, trust me, we will give them to you for brief periods of time. Hopefully, no one on this talk is taking a sedative every single night. That's very, very bad sleep hygiene. And we'll talk about that more in a few minutes. But I really want you to realize that it's about getting to that root cause, and again, getting these sleep hygiene practices together that will ultimately fix your insomnia as a symptom. Okay. Now, the other thing to know is that there are a few organic conditions that we do need to rule out if you are having trouble sleeping at night. There is a condition called narcolepsy, which is a real disorder in the central nervous system where the brain's activating system actually does not work reliably, and a person can fall asleep in the middle of the day. And this is a neurologic disorder, and it's associated with people literally falling asleep in otherwise environments where a normal person would not. Narcoleptics can fall asleep in the middle of speaking. They can fall asleep while riding in a car. Some of them will even fall asleep when stopped in traffic. And they will say they have this uncontrollable need for sleep. It comes on very quickly and they cannot fight it. That's a completely different situation. And it's really about the inability to stay awake during the day, which then can sometimes lead to insomnia symptoms at night. Another thing we always need to think about is we need to make sure that you don't have sleep apnea. So this is a reason that people get woken up repeatedly at night, is that they actually lose the ability to breathe. Their body wakes them up because they're not getting enough oxygen. And then that awake state allows their body to breathe normally. And then they fall asleep and the same thing happens over and over and over again. So that also needs to be ruled out. And most of my patients with chronic insomnia, which is insomnia that's lasted more than 3 months, I will send them for a sleep study just to make sure that that is not the underlying cause of their insomnia. The number one reason that people have insomnia in the Western world is not because of sleep apnea. It's not because of narcolepsy. The main reason that people have insomnia is because of some sort of mood disorder. Mood disorders being things like anxiety and depression. And if you're ever someone who says, well, it's just that I can't shut my brain off, then most likely you're suffering from an untreated mood disorder, and insomnia is one of the symptoms of that mood disorder. It's not the disorder itself. So when thinking about big habits that impact sleep, we need to realize that there are some prerequisites for sleep. So we have the elimination of light noise in the room. We have to remember that sleep occurs in total darkness. So if your room is not not dark enough so that when you hold 5 fingers in front of your face, you cannot see how many are up. You need to make your room darker. Please, please, please invest in room darkening shades. That is going to be a life-changing investment. And you really do need to make your room quite dark at night. If you're worried about how am I going to get to the bathroom, you can get a motion sensitive plug-in nightlight, plug it into one of your wall outlets. You step out of bed, voila, it lights up, turns off after 30 seconds, allows you to get back to sleep. The other thing we want to think about are sources of noise in our environment, both our mental and physical environment at night. So examples of this are the sleep disruptors of alcohol, caffeine later in the day, large meals that are harder to digest within 2 hours of bedtime. This would include fatty meals. Most meals that are high in fat are meals not made at home. They're things like your Mexican takeout, in and out with the French fries and the fried burger patty. Anything that you're going to get through a drive-through is going to be a high fat meal. Okay. And then also prepackaged foods, right? So even a pizza that you throw in the oven, fish sticks, chicken tenders, things like that. These are high fat meals, and they make it really hard for your body to digest quickly. And if you're still digesting food when you're trying to get to sleep, the body has a hard time with that. And then intrusive thoughts. So I'm guilty of this. I'm definitely scrolling on my phone later in the evening. And I've actually gotten into a pretty bad habit where my sleep time has been shifted back about an hour because I don't give myself a strict bedtime in terms of when I need to get off the phone for my doom scrolling. So I usually tell my patients, if you're having issues getting less than 8 hours of sleep and not getting enough sleep opportunity, you really want to give yourself a screen curfew of 2 hours before your desired bedtime. And you want to reverse engineer that. So say you have to get up at 6 a.m. every morning and you know you need to get 8 hours of sleep. And yes, that's the number that you need to get, 8 hours, not 6, not 7, not even 7.5. We really want you to aim for 8 hours. And that means you really want to be in bed about 30 minutes before that 8 hour clock begins. So that means that you want to be in bed by about 9:30. That means you got to turn off screens at 7:30. That's the phone, that's the laptop, that's the iPad, that's the TV. And you need to do that until you're reliably able to get in your bed at 9:30 and be asleep by 10. And a lot of people, when they actually give themselves these screen cutoffs and do that for a few weeks, they then are able to watch screens a little bit closer to bed, maybe 60 minutes before their bedtime, but now they've got that rhythm back entrenched. And then finally, the elimination of room noise. So these are things like electronics, noises, a temperature that's not quite right. I was not sleeping well, and then I realized I probably need to be running my AC at night, and that made a big difference. And then also, if you've got a lot of ambient noise in the house, make sure that you're doing everything you can to minimize that. There are some really wonderful products on the market that are made like earbuds that are made to sleep on, where when you lay on one side, they don't hurt your ear. They're very comfortable and they block out noise really, really well. Okay. And then we really want to try and keep our body temperature low. So a cool space, ideally pretty cool, about mid 60s. And then if you do a warm shower or bath before bed, that's a good kind of reset for your brain that lets you know what, it's bedtime now, we're slowing down. And then the other thing that a warm shower or bath does is that it helps your body jettison off extra heat because it vasodilates your skin. So you've got lots of heat coming off and it lowers your body temperature more quickly because we're all a little bit cooler when we sleep, believe it or not. So taking a warm bath in a way as part of your sleep routine is a great idea as well. And then foods that can support sleep. So I talked to you earlier about those nutrients that we really need to consider getting enough of and how a lot of Americans don't get enough. So magnesium was the number one. So I put this chart here so you kind of see the highest magnesium foods that we would run into on a daily basis. Nuts and seeds are a great source of it, as are beans. Are a superfood. I love beans in general, by the way. They contain protein, complex carbohydrates, fiber, and a lot of lignans, which are great for gut health. And then some green leafy vegetables like spinach, avocado, but it's 1 cup. You need a lot of avocado to get a decent amount of magnesium, and that's a lot of calories. So it's not really your best option. I'm a huge fan of spinach, right? So you can eat 3 pounds of spinach, and it's probably about 30 calories. So you're never going to accidentally eat too many calories of spinach. So spinach is a really great source of magnesium, and that's the one that I would think about. And then milk before bed. So a lot of you probably like, oh, I need a glass of warm milk. So milk actually does contain magnesium in it, but just keep in mind that the milk you drink before bed, that magnesium doesn't have time to be converted to melatonin that night. It's going to take a little bit longer than that. Now, everyone always wants to know about supplements, right? What supplements can I take so that I can sleep better? And here are a few on this screen that I want to talk to you about. So the first one is melatonin. Anyone can take melatonin if you're not pregnant, seeking pregnancy, you're not breastfeeding. And I do recommend that you are at least in puberty or a teenager before supplementing with melatonin. In general, if you have got a kiddo who's not sleeping well, that is going to be lifestyle or mood that's really triggering that. Unfortunately, most teenagers and adults are on their devices way too late and often through the middle of the night. And that is going to suppress that large, wonderful amount of melatonin that they naturally make. And keep in mind, we grow when we are sleeping. So I always tell my kids who are bad at getting off the phone or have parents who aren't good at, kind of taking their device away when they go to their bedroom. So, if you don't sleep that 8 to 10 hours a night that a teenager needs, you're not going to be as tall. You're not going to be as strong. You're not going to be as fast, and you're not going to do as well in school. And usually they kind of take notice of that. Another great supplement to try is valerian root. You'd want to talk to your doctor if you want to take this. It does interact with a few drugs, whereas melatonin really doesn't. You need to specifically look for valerian root extract. It actually helps calm the body, and it's actually used in the European Union as a sleep aid. And they actually make standardized forms of it on that continent. Unfortunately, it's hard to get a standardized extract here, but you do want to look for something that is standardized to 0.8% valerianic acid. And you want to take between 300 and 900 milligrams a night. You need to find that on the back of the label of the product you're buying. Hops. So hops is the same plant used to make beer, and it is great for minds that don't want to slow down. It often comes in a combination with other herbs in a sleep aid. Again, you want to try and find one that's in an extract. And this is also not the easiest to find. You would have to go to a supplement store. Even on a place like Amazon, it's very, very hard to find one that has that ethanolic extract listed. If you don't see that these extracts are standardized, you have to assume that they're not, and you have no idea that you're getting the right amount of the product. And then finally, that flower that we saw on the first slide was a passion flower. So this actually causes sleepiness. It is the only supplement out there that's going to make you feel sleepy. So a lot of my patients say, I take melatonin, but it doesn't make me sleepy. It's not supposed to. It never just claimed to, and it's not its purpose. But passion flower actually can help induce sleepiness. And the cool thing is it doesn't have to be standardized. They just kind of dry the flower and put it into the supplement, and you can take up to 700 milligrams before bed. Now, all of these do need to be taken consistently, and unfortunately, no supplements are studied for safety beyond 3 to 6 months. That includes melatonin. That said, melatonin is the one supplement that I tell my patients it's okay to take long term because our bodies do make it every day. And in this country, it's easy and cheap to make. But you do want to look for this USP seal that you can see in the bottom right of your screen. That's kind of like the good housekeeping seal of supplements. When you see this seal, it means that it's been independently verified, that the product has in it what the label says is there, nothing more, nothing less. A lot of supplements, actually the majority that are tested, contain little to none of the ingredient listed on the front of the label, and often contain dangerous fillers and excipients such as arsenic and lead. So you really, really want to buy all your vitamins and supplements looking for this USP symbol. A lot of the nature-made products contain this USP symbol. Also, the Costco Kirkland brand makes a lot of these with the USP symbol. Okay. And We also want to let anyone who might be a professional athlete or an athlete participating in any sort of competition who gets drug tested. We don't recommend taking supplements because there can be excipients in it that could cause you to test positive. So if you have a kiddo who maybe is, going to tryouts and they might get, drug tested, please make sure that they're not taking any supplements. And if they are taking any vitamins, make sure they're USP certified. So back to Barry. So after all this advice, Barry seemed to be less anxious. He's going to try the sleep tips, and he explains he has a couple friends who might benefit from your advice. And you say, send them our way. We're happy to educate them as well. And then you say, by the way, Barry, there's this really great book. If anything I said piqued your interest, I really want you to know that this is really the Bible for me in terms of sleep physiology. It's a pretty dense book. Mine has about 75 bookmarks in it, but it's that good. And it's written in a way that is interesting to both doctors and people who have no medical background, by Matthew Walker. He's really the foremost sleep researcher in the nation. And you can get this on Amazon. It's in a lot of people's libraries. So that's a great book to utilize if you're interested in reading more. And we've got some resources here. I hope you guys will have access to the PowerPoint. I have shared it with your team. So a couple great websites that you can use. And with that, I will take questions.
Thank you so much. That was so great.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Let me unshare my screen here.
All right. So the first question is going to be, how does screen time and exposure to blue light actually affect our ability to fall asleep?
Yeah, so going back to those first few slides that we were looking at earlier today, as I mentioned, many cells in our body, not just our eyes, know what time it is based on the light around us. So when you're exposed to blue light, your body sees that as sunlight. So the screen you all are looking at right now, your body sees that as sun. So example, I'm in a conference room. It's got no windows, but my body thinks that it's outside in the sun because of the wavelength of the fluorescent lights above me and the screen coming at me. So that's why, and people would say they will get more tired when they're in closed conference rooms. That's usually because of the temperature. So remember how I said it's good to have a cool environment to sleep. So as your body temperature drops, that also helps induce sleep. So really staying warm in those rooms might help. That's why I love sipping on hot tea when I'm in a cold conference room like I am today. But that light that from your devices, including the TV that too many of you have in your bedroom, there's no need to have a TV in a bedroom, none at all. It should be in your living room or in some other room where you're awake and alert, not in your bedroom. It really does impact our body's ability to make the hormones we need to sleep.
Thank you. And kind of in follow-up to that, someone asked, do blue light glasses / screen filters actually help reduce the impact of blue light?
Yes. Yeah, so if you're someone who has to be on a computer at night, and you maybe, because of however your life is structured, you have a really hard time getting that 2-hour curfew, throw them on. There's no harm, no foul, and it could make a very big difference. I think it also helps with eye strain personally.
Gotcha. The next question is, so you kind of went over this, but I frequently see melatonin and magnesium recommended as sleep supplements online, which is more effective for falling asleep and staying asleep. And if magnesium is better, which form works best? Just because there's a lot kind of circulating.
So melatonin is better for staying asleep. And if you're going to take melatonin regularly, take the long-acting melatonin. A lot of my patients have no idea that this is sold in the stores, but it is. It's called time-released, extended-released, long-acting. Usually there's a little clock on the front of the bottle to let you know this is long-acting. It's not the kind you chew. Obviously, anything you're chewing is instantly being released. So long-acting melatonin, you want to take it 1 to 2 hours before bed because it does take a little bit longer to start absorbing, but it then slowly gets absorbed as it passes through your gut overnight, and that will help you stay asleep. It's not going to make you feel tired, but it will help you stay asleep, kind of prevent that wakening and not being able to get back to sleep around 3 a.m. that a lot of people experience. And then magnesium is a calming mineral. All right, so if you're going to take it, you might as well take it before bed just to get those plasma levels up. But you want to make sure that you're getting, if you're taking it in the form of a supplement, so if you're taking it in food and you're just like, I'm just going to start eating, some poached spinach with my dinner every night, that's fine. You'll absorb that magnesium beautifully. But in the supplement form, you want to look for chelated magnesium, which means it gets out of your gut and into the rest of your body. Non-chelated magnesium is a laxative, and it works beautifully for that purpose, but that's not what we're talking about here. And then ideally a glycinate or a threonate. Those are the two that get into the muscles and into the central nervous system that help kind of calm down the central nervous system.
Perfect. Thank you for clarifying that. That's always something I wonder as well. So that's helpful. How do sleep needs change across different stages of life from young adults to older adults?
So everyone needs at least 8 hours. I'm going to say that again. Everyone needs at least 8 hours, even if you're 90 years old. Now, it's the rare 90-year-old that is actually asleep for 8 hours. And that's because a lot of us develop a lot of anxiety when we get older. So it's very common for older people to have anxiety, and that will keep them up at night. Older people tend to say, "Oh, I wake up because I have to pee all the time," and yes, but we're not making any more urine when we get older. We actually probably make less because we drink less. So I always tell my patients, if you're waking up repeatedly to pee, it's likely because you're never getting into deep sleep, and you need to examine your sleep hygiene habits and your sleep environment. The main thing to know is that we all need 8 hours. And then when we're younger and growing, so up till age 18, 19, 20, when we're still actually growing and our brain's developing, we really need more than that. So babies need about 16 hours. Once they start walking and talking, they need closer to 12. Teenagers need 10 to 12. And then once we're, about 20 years old, we can get by with 8.
Gotcha. Somebody said, what about people that say they need the TV on to sleep?
Yes, so those people have bad sleep hygiene. So no one needs the TV on to sleep. So the way that I tell my patients this is I say, well, most people have spent at least one night of their life with a baby in the house. Maybe they were a babysitter. Maybe they had a little brother or sister. Maybe they're parents themselves. Maybe they stayed at a friend's house and they had little kids. And I said, but even if you didn't, pretend I gave you a 6-month-old baby. And I said, well, we put the baby down at 7 p.m. Would you put that child in front of a television to help that child go to bed? And most people just laugh. They're like, no, I'm not going to put that baby in front of a television. And I just look at them and I say, well, then why would you put you in front of a television? And I go back to the basics of we are supposed to be in a dark environment. Darkness is a prerequisite for sleep. The reason you need the TV on is that you need something in the background going as fast as your brain is going to make you feel relatively slowed down. So I would encourage you, if you need sound, turn on the radio. It doesn't emit light. And I love sports radio for this. It's great. It's usually monotonal speaking. There's the Calm app, which most of us have, which is you can get for free. If you're a Kaiser member, you can get the deluxe edition for free. It has wonderful sleep stories. It has background noise. So use sound instead of information and light to get you to sleep. And I tell patients, I don't even want you to have a television in your bedroom because that's a window to the outside world, and your bedroom has to represent safety and sanctuary. Why would you fall asleep if you felt like the outside world could come and get you? Well, that television is the outside world. So move it to a different part of the house.
And then curious about how to balance cortisol once we have developed too much, especially in menopause. And she put in parentheses that no TV in the bedroom.
So this is all lifestyle, right? So exercise is a really, really powerful way to balance our hormones in general. And cortisol is really a response to stress. Menopause is not any more stressful than the rest of our lives, but most women are going through menopause in a stressful time in their lives, period. So whether you're a man or a woman, if you're in your 50s, you're often taking care of parents and taking care of kids, and mid-career, or looking to maybe wrap up your career in the next few years, looking at like supporting yourself, your elders, and also your kids financially. There's a lot going on, and you will make more cortisol as a result. So one of the best ways to minimize that is to regulate your nervous system with things like exercise, journaling, self-care. I'm a big fan of showering before bed, even if it's a quick rinse. For me, it's my brain's signal that my day is over and that my rest begins. So, try not to get caught up in my body is going to make more or less of this no matter what, because I'm in this stage of life, and realize that I have teenagers that are making tons of cortisol because they can't get off their phones, and they've got FOMO, and they, are living this virtual world where they think everyone's better and doing better than they are. So a lot of this we do to ourselves. So just be careful of that.
Right. So that is all the questions we have time for today. But that was a wonderful way to wrap up our Be Well San Diego series. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation and for the participation from everyone and the great insightful questions. Dr. Meyer, thank you again for delivering such an outstanding presentation on achieving quality rest and developing such great sleep habits. That was a great finale. Also want to express our sincere appreciation to Kaiser Permanente, whose generous sponsorship brought this entire series to us. And that's going to be a wrap on Be Well San Diego. This Friday, do be on the lookout for an email containing all the session recording links, plus the announcement of our series winners, which will be great. To all the participants who joined us week after week, your dedication to prioritizing wellness has been awesome to see, and we hope the strategies and insights from this series continue to enhance your health and well-being for years to come. So thank you, everyone, and thank you again, Dr. Meyer. Have a great day.
Thank you.